I opened my dream book cafe and invited my parents to the grand opening. Not one of them showed up. They all went to Bella's promotion party instead, as I closed up alone. Mom texted, "We need to discuss the book cafe," but my response shocked them all. Have you ever been forgotten by your own family at the most important moment of your life? And where are you watching this story from, and what time is it for you right now? Please leave your story in the comments so I know I am not alone. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Angela Carter, 28 years old, born in Portland, Oregon, and currently living in Seattle. Looking back on the journey I have traveled, I still feel like that little girl who sat for hours in the school library, hugging a thick novel, inhaling the scent of old paper, and dreaming that one day she could create a special space for fellow book lovers like me. I did not want a place that only sold coffee or only sold books, but a book cafe where people could sip a warm cup of tea while turning the pages, finding a bit of peace and a healing for their souls. Since I was a child, I had a peculiar habit. Whenever I was sad, instead of telling someone, I would write a few lines in my journal or randomly open a book. It always seemed that a line or a character would speak for my feelings. That very habit planted in me a belief. Books can be the most loyal companions, but turning that dream into reality was anything but easy. After graduating from college, I worked part-time in the school library, then as a barista in a small coffee shop just to learn the trade. I saved every dollar from my modest paychecks, cut down on personal pleasures, and poured all my free time into studying how to run a small business. I enrolled in basic management classes at the community center, learning how to create budgets, negotiate lease contracts, and apply for operating permits. There were nights when I sat alone in my cramped Seattle apartment, staring at spreadsheets, wondering if I was being foolish when everyone around me was chasing so-called stable careers. And here I was dreaming about opening a book cafe. Yet each morning when I stepped into the library and looked at the endless rows of shelves, I knew I couldn't live my whole life without at least trying. Finally, after years of saving and preparation, I found a little corner spot in Capitol Hill that felt perfect. It used to be an old bakery that had shut down, with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street where people often walked by with coffee cups in hand. I spent months renovating, repainting the walls, building shelves, choosing light wooden tables and chairs, and stringing warm golden lights across the ceiling. The name came to me on a rainy afternoon. Chapter and Chai. I wanted each visit to feel like opening a new chapter, with the sweet aroma of chai tea serving as the bridge that connected people to this space. It was simple, but it carried every ounce of my heart. While I was eagerly preparing for opening day, my family hardly seemed to care. My mother, Elaine, a seasoned HR manager, always valued stability and safety above all else. She believed in a secure career path with retirement plans and full benefits, not in risky dreams. My father, Robert, a soon-to-retire engineer, usually stayed quiet and followed her lead, rarely opposing, but never fully supporting me either. And then there was my younger sister, Bella, 26 years old, forever the pride of the family. She had just been promoted to marketing director at a startup, and all the attention, all the praise, was poured onto her. I was used to being placed in the background, but deep down, I still longed for the day they would finally see me differently. When I finished printing the invitations for the grand opening, I sent them straight to my family. My parents gave only a brief reply. "We'll see." The familiar phrase I had heard all my life, always vague, never a solid confirmation. Bella simply opened the message, left it on scene, and never responded. I had grown accustomed to their indifference, yet my heart still carried a flicker of hope. I thought, maybe when they saw my cafe filled with people, when they smelled the freshly roasted coffee and looked at the glowing shelves of books, they would feel proud. Maybe this time, they would come and finally smile at me with the warmth I had been waiting for all these years. On the morning of the grand opening, Seattle was covered in a thin veil of rain like mist, tiny droplets clinging to the windows and making the streetlights shimmer. I woke up at 4 a.m., my heart racing with both excitement and nerves, like a child about to walk into the first day of school. In the cafe's small kitchen, I fired up the coffee roaster. The aroma of freshly roasted beans filled the air, mingling with the scent of cinnamon from the waffle batches and the warm spice of chai tea, creating a comforting atmosphere. I arranged the shelves with care, one corner for classic novels, another for self-help and personal growth, and a section for multicultural literature. I wanted anyone who walked in to find a piece of themselves within these pages. I even prepared bouquets of fresh flowers, placing them on the wooden tables to add an extra layer of warmth. The first customers arrived at 8 o'clock, a pair of students from Seattle University. They smiled, ordered 2 lattes, and playfully argued over who would grab The Great Gatsby from the old book collection I had gathered. I overheard them say, "This place feels as cozy as a living room." And my heart blossomed. Then a middle-aged teacher from a nearby elementary school stopped in, bought a book on teaching writing skills to children, and praised my waffles as better than the famous shop down the street. Every compliment, every look of delight kept me busy without pause, but amid the laughter and the fragrant air, I found myself glancing toward the door each time it opened, hoping to see a familiar face from my family. By noon, every table in the cafe was full. A group of office workers came in during their lunch break, laptops in hand, saying they loved the mix of quiet focus and rich coffee aroma. An elderly man from the neighborhood told me he had felt sad when the old bookstore closed, but seeing Chapter and Chai open made him feel as though he had reunited with an old friend. I smiled, thanked him, and went back to making drinks. And yet, while strangers smiled at me, my heart grew heavier each time I looked at the long table near the window, the one I had saved, hoping my parents and Bella would sit there. At 3 in the afternoon, just as I set down a tray of freshly baked blueberry muffins on the counter, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened the family group chat. Instantly, my heart sank. On the screen was a photo of Bella standing on a stage, wearing a shimmering blue dress, holding her promotion certificate. My parents stood proudly on either side of her, their hands on her shoulders, smiles stretched wide across their faces. Behind them were relatives I hadn't seen in years, all dressed to impress, champagne glasses sparkling in their hands. And beneath the photo, my mother had written, "So proud of you, Bella," followed by 3 deep red heart emojis. Suddenly, the whole room around me felt cold, the laughter and chatter of customers echoing in my ears like distant noise. I froze, staring at the screen. Not a single person in my family had messaged to say they wouldn't come, not one apology, not even a simple congratulations for me. They had simply vanished from the most important day of my life to show up for Bella's. I forced myself to take a deep breath, hiding the ache inside, and lifted my head with a smile when a customer asked for another chai tea. My mouth kept speaking sweet words to guests, but inside, I felt a hollow emptiness widening. I couldn't help but wonder, had I been lying to myself all these years, believing that if I just worked hard enough, they would change, that they would finally see my worth? By 8 o'clock that night, after the last customers had left, I began cleaning up. I stacked the chairs, wiped down the counter, and slowly switched off the strings of golden lights. The room that had been so lively just hours before now felt unbearably empty. I stepped outside, pulled down the glass door, and listened to the click of the lock echo in the quiet street. The rain from earlier had softened to a mist, yet I felt soaked all the way through my heart. A day that should have been filled with joy and pride had ended in solitude. I thought of the carrot cake I had prepared, especially for my family, hoping we would cut it together to celebrate. It still sat untouched in the refrigerator. Just as I finished locking up, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mother. I opened it, a flicker of hope crossing my mind that maybe she would apologize, or at least say congratulations. But the screen showed only a short line. "Angela, we need to discuss the book cafe. Call me." I stood there on the damp street, the glow of my phone in my hand, reading and rereading that message. No praise, no encouragement, just a summons as if I had done something wrong. Inside me, disappointment and anger fused into a sharp cut I knew wouldn't heal anytime soon. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat on the sofa staring out the window. Car lights flickered past on the street below, but inside, the only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. Reading my mother's message over and over, I searched each word for warmth, for even the smallest sign of care, but there was none. "We need to discuss the cafe," she had written, her tone as dry and cold as the emails she sent to subordinates at work. I waited a little longer before deciding to call back, my heart racing as if I might finally hear an apology. But on the other end came only her icy voice. "Come to the house tomorrow night. There's something important about the cafe." Not a single word of congratulations, not a single question about how my grand opening had gone. Just a blunt command. I hung up, slumped back, and felt the crushing weight on my chest, as though a stone had been placed there. Memories from my childhood suddenly flooded back. I remembered when Bella was only 8, and Mom took her to ballet class. The whole family went along, filling the seats in the audience to clap and cheer. I was 10 then, and I had just entered a school essay contest. When I came home, excited to show off the certificate I had won for an honorable mention, Mom barely glanced at it before giving a faint smile and saying, "It's just a passing hobby. You'll forget it soon." I never forgot how that felt, the joy inside me extinguished in an instant, like a candle blown out. From that day on, I learned to hide my small achievements, because I knew they would never shine brightly enough to compete with the spotlight my family always saved for Bella. Now, staring at my mother's message, I realized history was only repeating itself in another form. I could either keep waiting for them to understand me, or I could prepare to prove that this dream was no childish fantasy. I chose the latter. That very night, I spread all my documents across the dining table in my tiny apartment. The Seattle business license, the 3-year lease agreement with an option to renew, the detailed financial plan I had spent months perfecting. I laid out the invoices for the espresso machine, the bookshelves, the POS system, each one stamped, signed, and fully paid. I organized everything neatly into a folder labeled Chapter and Chai, official documents. As I arranged the papers, I told myself, if Mom's intention was to belittle me, I would not give her the chance. I wanted to sit across from them and flip through each document, showing that I had acted seriously, with planning, with numbers to prove it. I was no longer the little girl dismissed at the dinner table, told that what she did was just a passing hobby. I was a 28-year-old woman, standing on my own, and I was going to make them see it. And yet, beneath all that determination, a quiet sadness still crept in. I thought of my mother reading my grand opening message and not bothering to reply, while at the same time joyfully embracing Bella on stage. I wondered, if I failed tomorrow, would they feel satisfied, glad that their warnings had proven true? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I knew I wasn't just preparing for a so-called family meeting. In reality, it was going to be an interrogation, where I would be forced to prove my worth to the very people who should have been my first supporters. That night, the rain tapped steadily against the window. I packed the folder neatly, slipped it into a black handbag, and placed it on the chair, ready for the next day. Tomorrow, I would walk into that house not as a daughter begging for validation, but as the owner of a book cafe, a woman who had turned her dream into reality with sweat and persistence. I knew it would be hard, I knew they would try to cut me down, but this time, I was ready. And deep inside, I felt a small flame whispering, "This is no longer their game. This is my story." The next evening, as I drove up to my parents' house, my nerves tightened like I was about to walk into a courtroom. Their familiar 2-story home in the northern suburbs of Seattle came into view, with its neatly trimmed lawn and rose bushes already wilting under the autumn rain. The dark wooden door creaked open, and there stood my mother, her face expressionless. She simply said, "Come in." No hug, no warm greeting, just a heavy silence hanging in the air. I stepped into the living room, where the golden light cast shadows over the old leather sofa. Bella sat cross-legged in the chair, a glass of red wine in hand, her lips curled in a half-smile, her eyes sharp as if waiting for my performance to begin. On the wooden table in front of them lay a thick stack of papers, arranged so neatly it felt less like a family conversation and more like a corporate meeting. My father sat at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression stern. He cleared his throat, then pushed the stack toward me. We've looked into some data. Here are the statistics. 80% of small cafes fail within their first 5 years. I glanced down and saw colorful charts, figures highlighted in neon markers, every word chosen to emphasize the riskiness of the path I had taken. My mother spoke slowly, her voice flat, as though delivering a staffing decision at the office. We think you should fold Chapter and Chai into Hart Family LLC. That way, it will be safer, under the family's umbrella. Bella will handle marketing, finances, and partnerships. You can take care of daily operations, brewing, shelving books, hosting small events. She paused, fixing me with a cold stare. The condition is that you change the cafe's name. Our proposal, Hart & Co., Books and Brews. It sounds professional, carries the family brand. I sat there in silence, my fingers gripping the edge of the folder I had brought. All the effort I had poured into creating Chapter and Chai, from the logo's font to the tiny slogan printed on the menu, was dismissed in a single sentence. They wanted to turn my personal dream into a so-called family project, one that Bella would ultimately control. Gathering all my courage, I asked, "Why didn't you come to the opening?" I sent the invitations, even sent reminders. My voice trembled slightly but held firm. The room seemed to pause. My father turned his head away, avoiding my gaze. My mother took a sip of water, then answered without a trace of emotion. Bella's promotion was more important. It impacts her career, opens big opportunities. Your cafe's opening could always be attended later, but Bella's chance to advance comes only once. Her words cut into me like a knife. I heard each syllable clearly, and the sting rose in my throat until it was hard to breathe. I turned to look at Bella. She sat there, lips curled into a victorious smirk, her eyes glinting with pride. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just that I had been abandoned on my opening day, I was being weighed and measured, reduced to nothing more than a weak number on their charts. My mother went on, her tone steady, almost mechanical. "Angela, I don't deny you have passion. But business takes more than passion. You need someone with expertise. Bella has experience in marketing, she has connections. If you let her manage the important parts, you won't carry so much burden. You should focus on what you're good at: reading, curating books, organizing small community events. Leave the bigger matters to someone else." I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Memories surged. Me as a little girl, clutching a literature prize, dismissed by mom as just a passing hobby, while Bella, after stumbling through a clumsy dance routine, was showered with applause. And now, the same script was playing out again, only on a bigger stage. My life's dream being diminished to a mere hobby, while Bella was once again crowned the center of everything. I placed my folder firmly on the table and met my mother's eyes. "Mom, I already have the business license, I've registered the DBA as Chapter and Chai, and I've prepared a financial plan. I don't need to fold it into an LLC just to lose control." My voice trembled slightly, but it was clear. My father seemed ready to speak, but one sharp look from my mother silenced him. I pressed on. "I'm not reckless or naive like you think. Every number is documented here." I pushed the folder toward them, each page stamped, signed, and dated. My mother narrowed her eyes, flipping through a few sheets without really reading, frowning as though all this evidence was nothing more than a childish prank. Bella let out a sharp, mocking laugh, the sound slicing through me like a blade. "You're good at reading books, I'll give you that," Bella drawled, tilting her chin with an air of superiority. "But when it comes to finance, you're clueless. Do you even understand cash flow? Do you know how to analyze ROI? Or do you really think hanging a few shelves and brewing chai tea is enough? You should let the adults handle that. The business world isn't like the pages of a novel." Her words hit me like ice water thrown straight into my face. I drew in a deep breath, swallowing the sting, but at the same time, a fire of anger flared up inside me. My mother cut in, her tone sharper than usual. You're delusional. We only want what's best for you. If you don't listen, you'll regret it. Passion doesn't pay bills, Angela. Do you think a handful of strangers wandering in is enough to live on? I looked at her and realized there was no real concern in her eyes for my happiness, only a fixation on failure, on family image. The phrase, "you'll regret it," had been their refrain since I was a child, spoken every time I dared to try something different. My fingers clenched the edge of the table until they turned white, and then I spoke, my voice steadier than I thought possible. No, this is my work and my dream. I won't let anyone take control. I've come far enough to know what I need, and I will not allow anyone to turn my dream into someone else's project. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a firmness that filled the room. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. My father looked at me with an unreadable expression, a trace of surprise flickering in his eyes, though he said nothing. Bella sat still for a few seconds, her mocking smile lingering on her lips, but in her eyes I caught the briefest flash of uncertainty. My mother clenched her fists, then slammed the stack of papers down on the table. You're too stubborn, Angela. If you fail, don't expect this family to save you. Don't come crawling back to us. I rose to my feet, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest, but my voice stayed firm. I won't need to. I will take full responsibility for my choices. I bent down, gathered my folder, slipped it neatly into my bag, and put on my coat. My footsteps echoed against the wooden floor, each one driving home the truth that I would not back down anymore. The air was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. I walked to the door without looking back. Behind me, I heard Bella mutter just loud enough for me to catch. You'll be begging for help soon enough. I didn't respond. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating like a temporary full stop to that bitter confrontation. I stepped onto the porch, inhaling the damp, cold air of a Seattle night. The drizzle tapped against my shoulders, but I didn't care. Inside me, something had shattered, but at the same time, something new had been born. Determination. Driving back to my apartment, my heart still raced, and sweat dampened my palms on the steering wheel. Yet, amid the trembling, one truth had never been clearer. If I gave in, I would lose not only the cafe, but also myself. All my life, I had grown used to living in Bella's shadow, to my mother's indifference, to hiding my small victories so they wouldn't be belittled. But this time was different. Chapter and Chai wasn't just a book cafe. It was my declaration to the world that I could carve out a space of my own, a life that no one else could cage. As my car turned onto the familiar street, I gripped the steering wheel tightly and told myself, no matter how hard it gets, I will not turn back. I knew I would face even greater challenges ahead, maybe even direct interference from my family. But instead of fear, I felt a new kind of energy rising within me. They wanted me to collapse to prove themselves right, but I would stand tall to prove I didn't need their validation. That night, when I arrived back at my apartment, I didn't go straight to sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain fall, and wrote in my notebook in big letters. From today, I set boundaries. And for the first time in my life, I believed I could truly hold those boundaries. After that night, after deciding to set boundaries with my family, I stayed up thinking about my next step. If they wanted to see Chapter and Chai as nothing more than a frivolous hobby, then I would turn it into undeniable proof that they were wrong. I knew that in business, you couldn't just sit and wait for customers to come on their own. I had to build a real community around the cafe, a circle wide enough to fill the emptiness my family had left behind. So I began a new plan, not just to survive, but to make Chapter and Chai a name that could not be dismissed. The first idea that came to me was Book Club Wednesdays. I reached out to a few regulars who had stopped by on opening day and asked if they'd be interested in themed book discussions. To my surprise, they were more enthusiastic than I expected. For the first week, we chose Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I printed a few small posters, taped them on the cafe windows, and posted an announcement on Instagram. On that first Wednesday night, more than 10 people showed up. They gathered around the long table by the window, sharing thoughts about family, generational differences, and the pressure of being the perfect child. I sat there listening, jotting notes, feeling my heart grow warm. I realized these conversations were the true lifeblood of the cafe, something no marketing strategy could ever replace. After that, I added open mic Fridays. At first, I was nervous, unsure if anyone would even want to perform in a little cafe like mine. But with just one inviting post, a group of music students from Seattle U reached out right away. On the first Friday night, I rearranged the space, set up a microphone and small speakers, and prepared extra chai tea and pastries. The cafe was packed. Someone read poetry about youth, another brought a guitar and sang ballads, and a young Korean woman read a short story in both English and her native language. The atmosphere was so alive and sincere that I had to stand behind the counter, quietly wiping away tears. For the first time, I felt the cafe wasn't just a place to sell drinks, but a place to nourish the soul. To keep things sustainable, I introduced a 10% discount for students and teachers. I knew Seattle was a city of books and schools, and if I wanted to connect with the community, I had to make it easier for book lovers to come often. I set up a loyalty system through the POS app, where customers could scan a QR code to collect points. Every 10 purchases earned them a free drink or a discount on a book. When I started noticing some customers returning again and again, I could clearly see how much impact such a small gesture could make. Not only that, I also started reaching out to connect with nearby shops. I visited a local bakery and proposed carrying their pastries at my cafe on weekends so customers would have more choices. The owner, an older man named Noah, agreed immediately and even suggested I place some books in a corner of his shop so his customers could sip coffee while reading. I stopped by the community library, talked to the librarian, and asked permission to post flyers about chapter and Chai's events. I went to the nearby high school and offered to host free creative writing workshops for students. Step by step, I wove together a network of relationships, making my cafe part of the neighborhood rather than just a business standing alone. Each night after closing, I would sit by myself, looking around at the space, soaking in the life it had begun to hold. I wrote in my journal, "My blood family didn't show up, but the community did. This is my real family." I slowly began to understand that I didn't need my mother's or Bella's approval to know my worth. Every returning customer, every smile, every strum of a guitar on Friday nights, these were the affirmations I had always longed for. Sometimes, I still felt a sharp ache when I thought of the empty chairs on opening day. But instead of waiting for them to be filled, I vowed to replace that emptiness with new faces and genuine connections. I promised myself, no one, not even family, will ever take away the life I've breathed into Chapter and Chai. On tired nights, I sat down to record revenue, calculate expenses, and I could still hear Bella's voice echoing. "You're clueless about finance." I would smile, open my budget spreadsheet, and review each carefully logged expense. I knew I wasn't perfect, but I also knew I was far from clueless. I was learning, I was growing, and every positive number in the daily report was proof that I could do this. Looking out through the cafe windows at the soft drizzle of Seattle rain, a strange sense of peace washed over me. Maybe I didn't have a family that supported me, but I had a community slowly forming, and I had myself. For the first time in my life, that felt like enough. One Monday morning, as I was wiping down the bookshelves and checking the espresso machine, an unexpected email popped into my inbox. The sender was a journalist from Seattle Weekly, the local magazine known for covering culture and community life. They said they had recently received glowing feedback about Chapter and Chai and wanted to feature me in their Small Business Rising column, a series highlighting small businesses that had bloomed after the pandemic. For a moment, I sat frozen, then burst out laughing in disbelief. This was an opportunity I had never even dared to dream of, a chance to show not only customers, but the entire city, that my cafe was a proud part of Seattle. I quickly replied with my acceptance and spent the rest of the week preparing for the photo shoot and interview. I cleaned every corner of the cafe, replaced the flowers on the tables, and rearranged the books so they looked neat and inviting. I even printed new bookmarks with the cafe's logo to hand out for free to customers. I wanted this interview to showcase more than just a charming little shop. I wanted it to capture the spirit of a young woman daring to take control of her own life, despite the doubts of her own family. Deep down, I knew that once this article was published, my family would no longer be able to dismiss my dream as child's play. On the morning of the photo shoot, I woke up at 5. I brewed a pot of chai tea, glanced at myself in the mirror, put on a simple beige dress, and tied the apron embroidered with chapter and chai. I wanted my image to be both professional and approachable, just like the spirit of the cafe. By the time the clock struck 9, I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was the journalist, but when I opened it, there stood Bella. My sister, dressed in an expensive business outfit, phone in hand, strode into the cafe as if it were her own stage. "Hey, sis," Bella said sweetly. "I heard the reporter from Seattle Weekly is coming today. I think it'll be better if I join. After all, I have marketing experience. I'll know how to present your brand in a more professional way." With that, she sat down, pulled out her phone, checked her reflection in the front camera, adjusted her hair and lipstick, as though she was the one about to be interviewed. I stood frozen for a moment, anger rising in waves, but I took a deep breath. This was the test. Either I gave in and let Bella steal the spotlight, or I held firm to the boundaries I had promised myself. I walked up to her, smiled politely, but spoke with absolute clarity. "Bella, thank you for caring, but this interview has only one owner. Chapter and Chai belongs to me, and I will speak for it myself." Bella's face stiffened, her smile vanishing. She stared at me, shocked that I had dared to refuse. "Are you sure? Journalists need someone who knows how to talk, how to do PR. You're just used to reading books and making coffee." I cut her off. "I'm sure. This is my voice, and I don't need anyone else to represent me." The room went still. Bella's cheeks flushed red, her embarrassment unmistakable. When the reporter and photographer walked in, all they saw was me standing calmly with a composed smile, while Bella hurried to her feet, muttered an excuse about being busy, and left. I watched her retreating figure, feeling for the first time that Bella had tasted what it meant to lose face. I wasn't gloating, but inside me there was a lightness, as though I had finally unshackled myself from invisible chains. The photo shoot went more smoothly than I could have ever hoped. The reporter walked around the cafe, capturing shots of the glowing bookshelves, steaming cups of coffee, and the window corner overlooking the rainy street. I told my story, from being the little girl who loved reading in the library, to finally gathering enough courage to open my own cafe. I spoke about my dream of making Chapter and Chai a place where the community could gather, share, and feel safe. When I mentioned book club Wednesdays and open mic Fridays, the reporters' eyes lit up. They said those events were a rare and remarkable distinction that few cafes could sustain. The photographer snapped more moments of me brewing tea, arranging books, and chatting with a few regulars. For the first time, I felt truly seen, not as the daydreaming girl my family dismissed, but as a young woman running a real business. A week later, the article was published. On the front page of Seattle Weekly was a photo of me standing before the bookshelves, the golden lights casting a warm glow on my face, with the Chapter and Chai logo clearly visible behind me. The headline read, "A New Haven in Capitol Hill. Angela Carter's Chapter and Chai." The piece detailed my journey of building the cafe in the aftermath of the pandemic, emphasizing resilience and the growing community surrounding it. Almost instantly, the article was shared widely across Seattle's social media. Strangers left comments full of praise, and new customers came streaming in, eager to experience the space featured in the news. That evening, the night the article was published, I sat in the cafe, watching the stream of notifications light up my phone. I knew without a doubt my family had seen the piece as well. They might not say anything, they might stay silent as always, but this time, the truth was beyond their control. Chapter and Chai was no longer just a fragile dream tucked inside my heart. It had become part of the city, a public testament that I could stand on my own. And the sweetest part was the memory of Bella's stunned face that morning, the first time in her life she had to accept that I was no longer hiding in her shadow. As the Seattle Weekly article spread across social media, I received a nearly 10-page email from my mother. The subject line was cold and blunt. Draft LLC agreement, immediate review. I opened it and found terms so detailed it was clear she hadn't written them alone. There was undoubtedly input from a lawyer she knew. On the surface, the contract claimed that bringing Chapter and Chai under Hart Family LLC would give me access to capital, marketing support, and shared risk. But the more I read, the more uneasy I became. One clause stood out in bold. All major decisions involving finances, expansion, or branding changes required approval from the managing partners, namely my mother and Bella. In other words, they wanted me to sign away my authority, to willingly hand over veto power, leaving me as the operator while they held the keys. I sat for a long time, my hands trembling as I turned each page. All the effort, sweat, and dreams I had poured into this cafe, signing that document would instantly make it theirs. I hit reply and typed only one sentence. I will not sign. This is my independent business. Then I shut down my computer. Fear flickered inside me, because I knew that by refusing, I had officially stepped into a direct confrontation. That fear became reality faster than I expected. The very next morning, just as I unlocked the cafe doors, a regular rushed in and said, "Angela, have you checked Yelp? Oh my God, why are there so many one-star reviews?" I pulled out my phone, and my heart nearly stopped. Overnight, Yelp and Google Maps had filled with dozens of one-star ratings. The comments all looked suspiciously similar. The coffee is cold, the staff is rude, the place is filthy. Some even said, "Don't waste your money here, this cafe will probably shut down soon." I knew immediately these weren't genuine reviews. Just the day before, I had been receiving praise from these very customers. This reeked of a coordinated smear campaign, a dirty blow aimed directly at my reputation. I sat in silence for a few minutes, my throat tight with bitterness. I had never felt so alone. But then one of my most loyal customers, a high school teacher who stopped by every afternoon, placed her hand gently on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Angela. Everyone who comes here knows what your cafe is really like. Fake reviews won't fool anyone." Her words were like medicine to my soul. I drew in a long breath and told myself, they can spread lies, but I will fight back with the truth. I spent the rest of the morning responding to each review politely and transparently, thanking them for their feedback, inviting them to come back and see for themselves, and reaffirming that our coffee is always served hot and our service always attentive. I didn't argue, I didn't lash out. Instead, I let my calm professionalism stand in stark contrast to the malice behind the attacks. Strangely enough, that very approach sparked curiosity. A few new customers came to see for themselves, and when they left with smiles, I knew I had chosen the right response. But the next blow came faster than I expected. A week later, during a busy lunch service, 2 health inspectors showed up, jackets with name tags and clipboards in hand. "We received an anonymous report about food safety concerns here," they said. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding, but I did not panic. I had been prepared from day one. Every food item labeled with dates, the refrigerator kept at correct temperatures, the 3-compartment sink spotless, dry storage organized. They inspected every nook, opened the freezer, measured temperatures, and checked the ServSafe certification. I followed them, answering each question with a confidence that even surprised me. In the end, one of them nodded and said, "Everything meets the requirements. Actually, your place is cleaner than many others. Keep up the good work." Only after they left did I exhale, my shirt damp with sweat. I knew exactly who was behind that anonymous report, and I became even more certain my family would not stop there. That night after closing, I took out my notebook and recorded everything. The day I received the contract email, the details of the veto clause, the day the flood of one-star reviews appeared, the time the health inspectors visited, and what they said. I took screenshots, saved copies of the email, even printed the fake reviews. I assembled a separate file titled Harassment Evidence. Looking at that file made my skin crawl. This was no longer small family clashes, it had become a series of deliberate actions aimed at controlling and undermining me. But instead of breaking me, it lit a new fire inside. I would not let them steal my dream. If necessary, I would use the law to protect it. After weeks of relentless fake reviews, health inspections, and pressuring contracts, I decided I needed to do something big, something that would make both the neighborhood and my family unable to ignore Chapter and Chai any longer. I spent countless nights brainstorming, scribbling ideas onto sticky notes and plastering them across my apartment walls. Finally, I chose one event. The Neighborhood Lit Fest, a small literary festival organized entirely by me. It didn't need to be massive, but it had to be powerful enough to root Chapter and Chai deep into the heart of the community. I sent invitations to several indie authors I had met back when I worked at the university library. Many of them agreed right away, thrilled at the chance to sign books and meet readers in person. I also reached out to an elementary school near Capitol Hill, offering to host a book drive to expand their library. "The kids will be so grateful," the principal replied, and I knew I was on the right track. I printed posters, ran a small ad on Facebook, and most importantly, I spoke to every regular customer, inviting them to bring friends and family along. On the day of the Lit Fest, Seattle was blessed with gentle sunshine, a rare gift in early spring. I woke at 4 in the morning, baked double the pastries, brewed large pitchers of chai tea, and rearranged the tables to create space for author signings, a children's reading corner, and a donation box placed right in the center of the cafe. By 9 o'clock, the crowd was already spilling in. People lined up at the door, many carrying bags full of books to donate. Laughter filled the air, the scent of hot coffee mingled with it, and the glow on every face made my heart swell. A young author read aloud from her debut novel, greeted by enthusiastic applause. A group of music students I knew from open mic Fridays strummed acoustic guitars by the window. Children sat cross-legged on a rug, listening intently as a volunteer read picture books aloud. I moved through the crowd, greeting people, accepting praise, shaking hands. Everything was unfolding better than I had ever dreamed. And then, as if scripted to test my resolve, my family appeared. I spotted them the moment they stepped through the door, my mother in a formal navy dress, her eyes scanning every corner with scrutiny. My father walking a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. And Bella in a striking red dress, her stride confident but her expression tightening when she saw the crowd cheering for my event. For a second, my heart dipped, but I drew in a deep breath and reminded myself, this is my stage, not theirs. They wandered around the cafe, their eyes darting as if searching for flaws. But just then, an older customer, perhaps in his 60s, approached me with a warm smile. "Angela, you're truly talented. This cafe is wonderful. I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and I've never seen an event bring people together like this." His praise rang out clearly in full view of my parents. I caught the flicker of surprise on my mother's face, her lips pressing into a thin line as though she couldn't decide how to react. Bella stood frozen, for once with no cutting remark ready on her tongue. And my father. He looked at me for a long moment before giving a small but deliberate nod. That simple gesture made my eyes sting. I invited them to sit, not to appease them, but to assert my boundaries. From my bag, I pulled out a white envelope and placed it in front of my mother. "This is a letter from my lawyer," I said evenly, my voice calm but steady. "If there are any further attempts to control or sabotage Chapter and Chai, I will take legal action. I've documented all the evidence." I saw the brief flash of pale color drain from my mother's face before she masked it again with her usual cold composure. She opened her mouth, ready to speak, but my father suddenly cut in. He rarely intervened in these confrontations, but this time, his voice was low and firm. "Enough, Elaine." Those 3 words landed like a gavel strike, pulling the room into silence. I turned to him and, in his eyes, I caught something, perhaps regret, perhaps a belated acknowledgement, but whatever it was, it told me one thing. I was no longer standing alone. The rest of the festival passed like a dream. The donation box overflowed with books within just a few hours. Indie authors kept signing copies and chatting with readers. A reporter from the local news station stopped by, filmed a few scenes, and promised to air them that evening. I watched as customers lined up for coffee, many bringing their families along, and in the middle of the laughter and chatter, I knew Chapter and Chai had truly become part of the community. My family slipped out quietly, without another word. But I didn't need them to say anything. I had the whole neighborhood standing behind me now, and I had found a new kind of family, one built on trust, a love of books, and genuine relationships. That night, as I closed up, the scent of coffee still lingered in the air, and echoes of laughter seemed to hover in the room. I felt stronger than ever. I knew the biggest battle was already behind me. From now on, my dream could no longer be dismissed or taken away. Later that evening, after the neighborhood lit fest, I stayed in the cafe a while longer, gazing at the neatly arranged tables and the donation box so full it nearly spilled over. I slowly poured myself a cup of tea, trying to unwind after such an intense day. When my phone buzzed, I startled for a moment. A message from Dad. "Angela, I need to talk." I hesitated for a few seconds before agreeing to meet him the next morning. We chose a small cafe, not Chapter and Chai. When I walked in, he was already seated in a corner, his usual sternness gone. He spoke first, his voice measured and calm. "I've stayed silent for too long. All my life, I let your mother make the decisions, thinking that was how to avoid conflict. But my silence made you feel abandoned." I looked at him, caught off guard by his honesty. He went on. "Yesterday, when I heard others praise you, I finally saw clearly that you've accomplished something I never believed you could. I'm sorry for not standing by you sooner." I took a deep breath, emotions welling up in a way I could hardly describe. For the first time in years, my father admitted he had been wrong. I answered softly, "I don't need you to take my side in everything. I just need you to acknowledge that I have the right to walk my own path without being belittled or controlled." He nodded, his eyes misty, but said nothing more. We sat in silence for a while, then parted with a brief but genuine hug. A few days later, my mother came to Chapter and Chai on her own. She entered looking tense, still trying to hold onto her familiar air of control. I led her to a corner table, and before she could speak, I said first, "Mom, I know you think you're protecting me, but the truth is, I only feel restrained. I'm safe when I have boundaries, not when I'm placed under your control." She looked at me, lips pressed tightly, but in her eyes I saw a flicker of uncertainty. I continued, my tone calm but firm. "If you love me, let me take responsibility for my own life. Chapter and Chai doesn't need a guardian, it needs an owner, and I am that owner." There was no angry reaction as I had braced myself for. She simply sighed and looked out the window. "Maybe I was wrong," she murmured, though she made no promise to change. I didn't expect her to. I knew she was someone who struggled to admit her mistakes. But at least I had spoken the words I once never dared to say. That same evening, I received an unexpected message from Bella. You did it. I'm sorry for trying to take control. I thought if the cafe succeeded under me, Mom would be prouder. But I was wrong." I stared at the message, my heart both relieved and unsettled. It was the first time Bella had admitted fault. I typed a few words, then erased them. In the end, I decided not to reply right away. I needed time. I left the message sitting there in open pause, a door not fully closed but not easily opened either. That night, I sat in front of my laptop and opened the family email thread. I knew I had to write something definitive, a clear declaration to finally end the cycle that had repeated for years. I would start something, they would try to control it, I would give in, and then be dismissed all over again. This time would be different. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and began. "This is my final boundary. Chapter and Chai is entirely under my management. No one may interfere in operations, communications, or finances. If anyone wishes to come, you are welcome to visit as ordinary customers sit down, drink coffee, and read. I will gladly welcome that, but I will not accept any further attempts at control. If there are, I will seek legal action. Oh! I reread it several times, adjusting each sentence so there would be no room for ambiguity. Then I took a deep breath and pressed send. The screen confirmed that the email had been successfully delivered. I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I opened the family group chat, hit mute, and let the familiar ding notification fade into silence. It would no longer pull me back into the same old spiral. Closing my laptop, I leaned back into the chair. My heart no longer boiled with rage as it once had. Instead, I felt calm, like a lake after a storm. I knew I couldn't change my mother or Bella in a single day. But I had changed myself. From the girl who once endured in silence to the woman brave enough to set boundaries, and I realized that was the real victory. 6 months passed since the day I sent that email breaking the toxic cycle. In that time, Chapter and Chai not only held steady but began to grow beyond the 4 small walls on the corner of Capitol Hill. I still remember clearly the morning I got a call from a local event company. They wanted to sign a long-term contract for Chapter and Chai to provide coffee and books for their series of cultural workshops downtown. When I signed my name on the dotted line, my hands trembled not from fear, but from emotion. A dream my family had once dismissed as a childish hobby was now being recognized by major organizations. From that contract, I gained enough budget to finally pursue an idea I had cherished for months: a mobile coffee and books cart. I commissioned a small wooden stand on wheels, painted in the same soft brown shade as the Chapter and Chai logo, and stocked it with baskets of used books, pitchers of chai, and brewed coffee. On weekends, I rolled it to the farmers market, where hundreds of families wandered, buying fresh produce and handmade goods. The very first time I set up, I never expected the crowd it would draw. Children dove into the baskets of comics, adults sipped coffee while browsing old novels. An elderly couple bought a few books and told me, "Thank you for bringing the aroma of coffee and the presence of stories to this market. You've made it feel warmer." In that moment, I knew I was on the right path. Alongside building my business, I also invested in myself. I began therapy sessions every week. At first, it was difficult to speak about the wounds of my family, to admit how often I had been dismissed and cast aside. But my therapist gently reminded me, saying no is not selfish. Setting boundaries is an act of love for yourself and for others, because it allows relationships to become healthier. Over time, I learned how to refuse without guilt, how to sit with my own feelings without believing I was wrong for being different from Bella. Inside the cafe, I hung a small chalkboard right by the counter. On it, I wrote in white chalk, "Family doesn't mean control, boundaries mean love." Many customers paused to read it, nodding in quiet agreement. Some even snapped photos and posted them on Instagram with the hashtag number #BoundariesMeanLove. I never explained the story behind it, but every time I looked at that board, I felt more steadfast in the path I had chosen. Over time, my family responded in their own ways. My father occasionally stopped by Chapter and Chai, usually in the late afternoon. He never said much, just picked out a few old books, ordered a cappuccino, and sat quietly in a corner reading the paper. Before leaving, he would nod at me, his eyes a little softer than before. I didn't call it reconciliation, but I took it as a small gesture, a belated acknowledgement that I had my own worth. My mother kept her distance. She didn't visit, didn't send messages, seemingly choosing silence as her last form of control. Bella, after her hesitant apology, rarely reached out. Sometimes she left a like on a cafe event post online, but nothing more. I no longer expected anything. I had learned how to let go. And I felt more at peace than I ever had. Peace when I opened the cafe in the morning, the little bell jingling to welcome familiar faces. Peace when I watched children chattering as they picked books from the kids' shelf. Peace when the sound of a guitar filled the room on open mic Fridays, or when customers left holding steaming cups of chai, their shoulders eased after a long day. That peace no longer came from my family's approval, it came from the community I built, and from daring to trust myself. One rainy evening, after the last customer left, I locked the door. The streets of Seattle glistened under yellow lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I sat on a chair near the counter, opened the book I had been reading, and slid a bookmark into the middle. I poured myself a cup of hot chai, warmth spreading through my fingers. In that moment, I smiled softly. I don't need their approval anymore, I whispered, as if confirming it to myself. I've found family within me and within this community. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside my heart, the storm had passed.